hoping that it doesn't disconnect again. Well, first of all, thank you for inviting me here today. Also as a new member of the core team of AiTech, it's a pleasure also to present myself maybe and tell you a little bit about how I think and what I do. I'm a professor in Untitled AI. I'm a computer scientist. I was until 3 years ago in the computer science faculty, specifically in the Web Information Systems group. With it is also, let's say, that I collaborate with. I still have PhD students working there, esteemed colleagues like Jay and others that we work together, Joa remotely. But now I lead together with Geir Kortum the Knowledge and Intelligence Design group in the Faculty of Industrial Design Engineering. Well, in there collaborate in the context of the Design in AI program with Dave, for instance, there, with Maria Luce and with others. So we also do a little bit of AI in there, and of course, as you can imagine, we take more of a people-centric approach or a human-centric one, being, let's say, the Faculty of Design. That is, to some extent, to be expected. Now, what I want to do today is simply to share with you some of the reflections that I, let's say, developed while reading a paper that the AiTech team recently published, and talk about it in a second. And in the meanwhile, also contextualize a little bit the work that I've been doing together with, my team and brilliant students and colleagues in the last few years. I'm probably going to go either very short or very long because I don't know anymore how to present in person. So please, somebody take a look at the clock. If there is something that you would like to discuss with me right away, please just do it. Let's not wait until the end. I would like this to be more of a discussion than of a presentation if possible. So first thing you might wonder is why that particular background? So this is actually an artwork from Kent Logowski. Kent is an artist that, realized that puzzle makers use all the same cutouts for puzzles. So if you actually combine multiple puzzles, you can create one that somehow fits together. And this is nice. I mean, I think it's also mesmerizing in a way, but to me it's also evocative of how we do AI these days. That is, we have multiple pieces that somehow fit together, we engineer them together, and then, yes, something comes out. It's not exactly what we wanted, but it's sort of okay. So a sort of a reverse engineer way to go about things. And this is, to me, is also the starting point. So when we look at AI techniques, of course, they are increasingly becoming performing and very, very nice. We adopt them everywhere. But the thing is that we know that they also have a lot of limitations because of their data needs and computation needs, bringing issues of availability, for instance, but also others. Which channel is you? I know because Akadi says so. Yes. Cool. Akadi's Sorry. No worries. But we know that there are many, many issues, right? We know that they're not very robust. Actually, they're very brittle to out-of-distribution prediction, perturbation in general on the input. We have huge issues of transparency and explainability. So we know that especially the most complicated method, deep learning and the like, we know that they sort of work, but you don't necessarily know why. And this is actually a very active and interesting area of research. And ultimately, there isn't really a lot of intelligence in the AI things that we use. I mean, there is a lot of pattern recognition working perfectly fine, but not necessarily what we will consider to be human-like intelligence, right? I don't want to go into the debate of what is intelligence, but I hope you get what I mean. And here I somehow subscribe to the view that Jeff Bingham has. Jeff is an associate professor at CMU and also working in machine learning team in Apple, where he's somehow, or some time ago, already tried to distinguish, hyped AI and useful AI, right? Where useful AI is the one that we actually AI that we use in practice. And when we use it in practice, it is less and less about fancy AI models that are to some extent saturating. Again, big discussion if deep learning is hitting a wall or not. I don't want to go there. Where I want to go is the fact that the moment we bring these techniques in the real world, then the set of challenges tend to change from a purely technological one to a broader set of challenges, right? Socio-technical, sociological, ethical, legal, and so on. So This, and by the way, if you have a presentation bingo with icebergs, check them because I have one. So if let's say the AI iceberg, the part that is actually below the level, right, is the one about human AI interaction, right, and broadly speaking, or human AI systems, as in the case of the paper. So it's more about how we formulate problems, how the systems are evaluated, how the data is collected. This is something that is really close to me, something I've been working on for many years, and also how the interaction works. And this is where we're going towards today in practice. The way we look at it from a design perspective, or let's say that we like to look at it from the faculty, is what if AI was designed instead of being engineered? Right now we engineer it very well, most of the time, but what if you want to design it? What if instead of doing something and just dealing with the consequences, we actually tackle the uncertainty right away in order to deliver something that we want, and not only something that's sort of happened, pretty much like the puzzle that we were talking about before. And in this context, I really welcomed and enjoyed reading this paper, first authored by Luciano, Maria Lucis, Evgeny, and others from the AiTech team about meaningful human control, actionable properties for AI system development. I really liked it. I think it's a very useful read. I'll talk about it in a second, and also maybe a couple of reflections over that. Also because it tries to bridge a gap between discussions that are more on the ethical level and ones that are more operational. And I think we need more of that work, right? Going really into the actionable part of the job of designing and implementing AI. So quick summary, things that are really stood out with me. First of all, well, why do we need meaningful human control? Many of these things, by the way, the team probably already discussed plenty, so I'm sorry for the repetition. It's also for me to self-reinforce the notions here. Because we want humans to remain in control of these systems, right? And be morally responsible for them. So we want to make sure that these people are aware and are of the limitations and possibilities of these human AI systems and can actually meaningfully deal with them and have control over them. And I like in this formulation also this idea of relying on these two necessary conditions of tracking and tracing that are somehow rooted in the work of Filippo and Jeroen. So tracking is about the system being responsive to the human moral reasons, and the tracing is about the behavior to be traced back to human agents. So you want to have both these directions of the relationship between the human and humans and their own values and morals, and how the system gets implemented, it executes, interacts with the real world and back. The whole paper is about 4 properties that are somehow defined in there that I just have here. I mean, we can read them together, but they're basically about expliciting, teasing out, and eventually verifying in a way, or at least controlling the moral boundaries of a particular AI, human AI system. So we need to really tease it out. It should not be implicit. It should be explicit. It should be out there, and the system should be able to control for it somehow. Understand when it goes out of those boundaries. It's about having shared representation of the problem in the domain, and also of, to some extent, how the human and the AI system operate. So these are mutually compatible representations. It's about the fact that humans should have the ability and authority to control those AI systems. So it's a matter of competence, but also a matter of authority. So being entitled to, be allowed to do it. And it's also about the link between the actions of the humans and the action of these agents, and the two of them somehow being related, so that there is no deviation due to emerging behaviors from the AI system that were not codified in the beginning. It's a really quick summary. I left out the best part of it. I'm sorry if this is too short. The paper is there to be read. Please do, because it's a very nice one. But since I have only 20 or so minutes to talk about the rest, I would like to go on about the rest. Maybe we can have a discussion about the paper. So something that really stood out with me, and something that triggers some reflection from my side. One of the, I actually also spoke about it during my Agora lectures a couple of years ago. what I really believe is the main problem when it comes to AI system is people, right? People are actually the issue here, right? Technology is, there is a lot to be done, but it's really about people. It's about the human in these human AI systems. And to me, the first question is, who are these people? Because we have a sort of an assumption that there is a designer or there is an engineer. In practice, the people around the human AI systems are planning. Each one of them have different interests, each one of them have different competencies, responsibilities, and sometimes when we talk about, moral boundaries, I wonder whose boundaries, because there are so many ones that need to be aligned, right? When we say in the paper that the humans that are responsible for designing the behavior of the system should be aware of the moral constraints and operate according to that, I wonder, for instance, is this also applicable for the crowd workers labeling the data that goes into the system? How do we guarantee that that actually happens, right? Auditors have a different one. So as you see, to me, there needs to be an acknowledgement of the fact that the plurality of individuals that actually are involved in designing the behavior and running the system is so big that sometimes where to put exactly, like the pressure is not super clear. Again, I don't think this is a new argument when it comes to meaningful human control. I think it's actually also in the literature. But to me, it becomes really evident the moment you really design and engineer the systems, because you really have to take into account all of this. I will give an example later on. Another one for me that is was somehow important to look at is which human AI systems are we talking about? In the paper, you discussed two examples, self-driving cars, right? So autonomous systems operating in the real world, so self-driving cars, or autonomous robots. I mean, right now we have a whole bunch of autonomous systems out there. And this is, of course, important, right? It gives us context, but this context is so needed and so important that definitely scopes bounds the generalizability of what we believe to be meaningful human control. I suspect, I believe, that it declines very differently the moment it gets discussed, thought about in the context of a single system. So I believe that a self-driving car, and I think you do too, is not the same thing as a large-scale language model that can be used to co-author text, or as much as we do these days, we like digital twins, where we create digital representations of real-world people and systems for the purpose of studying them or simulating what happens in these systems. It's not really the same. Right? There are some fundamental differences in how these systems are designed, how they are controlled, what are the control points, and I wonder how much the operationalization of those four properties can be generalized. Again, I know that this is not a new argument in the area. It's actually a pretty common one, but somehow stood out when I was reading the paper and thinking about my own experience as a scientist, as an engineer. I've been also playing around with the technology for a while. So that's very high level, my two figures, right? So who are the people and what are the systems? These are the sort of problems where we probably need to engage with the practicality of both those questions before being able to actually come with an actionable solution. Nonetheless, I think that the four properties actually stand, but perhaps with some caveats, and that's actually what I want to talk about in the rest of the presentation. From the people side, in practice, if you're thinking about designing human AI systems, people are the raw materials. People are the entities from which we extract data, traces, whatever, right? And there are several problems with this that also touch upon the issue of meaningful human control. First of all, where the data are coming from, and we have been experiencing for the last 10 years at least, I just call it the big data availability fallacy. You can call it the big data availability bias. The idea that just because we have a lot of data, truth is out there to be grasped. And this is now becoming, asymptotically, an issue, because we are now really engaging with web-scale data sets. When this is, for instance, on the right, a paper recently published 1 or 2 weeks ago from Facebook, they published their own large language model. the equivalent of a GPT-3. But differently from OpenAI, which is also ironic in a way, they released everything. They released the data set, they released the code, they released a logbook. They are doing everything by the book, depends what by the book is, by the way, of responsible AI. Right? And also they released a nice paper where they basically discuss the potential harms and limitation of the model. And what it boils down to, if you read it, I just put some excerpt there, that issues of biases encoded in the large model and issues of undesirable, potentially harmful behavior like toxic language and the like actually come out of the data, seems to be strongly correlated with the data they use, which is intuitive, of course. If you train your model on Twitter data and on Twitter people just throw manure at each other, you won't get a model that is very likely to create polite and artistic and poetic sentences out of there. But of course, garbage in, garbage out. I mean, what is the news here? But the implicit assumption that if we go large enough, all of this becomes less of an issue, turns out to be probably a wrong one. Some people are now riding this, this wave of what's the new thing, Data Centric AI now? How they call it?
Yeah, that's exactly.
Yeah, I mean, was it ever known Data Centric AI? But anyway, right? But they want to somehow highlight the fact that you don't need large data, you get good data. And how do we get good data if you don't find it out there in the wild and you actually want to create it? Well, there is a technique that we have been studying for more than 10 years and was out there for more than 10 years, which is crowdsourcing. The idea to reach out to large amount of people proactively to ask their involvement in data management operations, being creation, annotation, manipulation, whatever it is. And one of the main tools that we have are crowdsourcing platforms. Actually, microtask crowd work platforms like Mechanical Turk, Prolific, Crowdflower, you name them. What surprises me still sometimes here, and this is a little bit of a, I don't know how to call it, maybe I'm a little bit arrogant in this respect, is that people somehow rediscover the warm water or the hot water when it comes to data quality, because there have been communities out there for more than 10 years studying how to get people to be part of computational processes like data generation. And so when I find studies or things like this that, like this excavating I had for Kate Crawford, the classical critique of the issues of labeling data, used for machine learning, of the quality of this label, I wonder, yes, so what? This is the result of bad practice. This is the result of assuming that you can simply consider people that you engage. So this again speaking to the human control, meaningful human control, and the quality of the work, that they are fungible, that they are not real people, that you can just pay them by the minutes, and you can simply rely on their ability to empathize and to identify and so on, which is simply not true. If you don't do that right, and back in the days when this was done for ImageNet, I must admit the knowledge about how to do this was not as developed as it is now. So it is easy to criticize back, but now we know more. Okay. Back in the days it was not there, and what you get is, yeah, to some extent garbage. Luckily, some work has been done in that respect, and I want to highlight one work that my colleagues from computer science, Joel, for instance, recently published about things like cognitive biases in crowdsourcing. How to design crowdsourcing task, a checklist, somehow inspired by similar checklists from behavioral economics, right? What actually can go wrong if you don't design your crowdsourcing task well, which practically means if you don't design your data collection and annotation well. So issues of affect heuristic, availability bias, disaster neglect, right? This is really speaking to the problem here, right? Help crowd workers who commit to my task be properly informed about the consequences of their participation. One will wonder, is the one that is collecting the data aware of that? But that's a different story. But are we really? I mean, there is something out there, but then it's still not in the let's say in the mindset of practitioners and scientists, to the point where we still see something like this. That's a paper that was published 3 or 4 weeks ago of NAS. And probably you saw that. To me, it was sort of like a car accident happening on Twitter, because these two authors, right, they tried to do everything right. They wanted to collect a data set of human assessment of some qualitative properties of people to their face, assuming you could. They dealt with the privacy issue because they didn't use real faces of people, but they generated synthetic faces, controlling for some of those properties. They tried to do everything by the book. And then they wiped out a mechanical Turk or equivalent. They gave 1 million images to be evaluated by 30 participants, and what you get is strong biases. Obviously, right? This could be seen by things like, okay, people evaluating there which faces are more typical or which faces are more or less like you. And if you look at this image, can you imagine the demographic properties of the crowd workers? Yes.
I have a question about this. So is this, do you think, mainly due to the fact that they're faces and that they have strong opinions about these? Like, what if they were abstract images? And assuming that people could actually create abstract images, would this still occur?
That we all have all type of biases playing a role, right? I mean, imagine something like a simple, recent example that just came to my attention. Imagine people assessing the balance or like the sentiment of a particular sentence based on emojis. There is a cultural divide between younger people and older people in the interpretation of the emojis, right? A smiley face is apparently from younger generations is more about like a yeah smile, not a real smile. So even for something like emojis that are abstract, and there is the problem of biases. So demographic, culture, the way that you pay, the incentives that workers have, all of that contribute in the quality. And there's plenty of empirical evidence about this. It's not, it's not necessarily new, right? We are discovering new ones, but again, 15 years of research in that respect.
Yeah, I mean, for example, for images like land shapes, your graduate student project.
Yeah.
It's still there, they exist, even though we barely recognize.
Yes, because when we go to the realm of subjectivity, we expect people to diverge in what they consider to be good, bad, beautiful, not beautiful, inspiring, not inspiring. Of course, machine learning systems are normalization machines, and I could spend other half an hour talking about the problem of how do you aggregate multiple assessment into a single one, because ultimately you want to learn one label. There is a very nice paper that won a Best Paper Award this year at Kai from Stanford, at Bernstein and all, where they actually have something like aggregation by jury. It's a different approach to not simply aggregate an average, but to somehow take it out. A few years ago, with a PhD student of mine, with Agata, when she was doing a master thesis, we also looked in this problem for the problem of toxicity assessment. What is considered to be toxic or inappropriate varies a lot. So every time you go into the realm of subjective, you have to deal with these biases. They are almost inevitable. Yeah. So despite progresses, we are still there, and this is plus 3 weeks ago. But it's not only about crowdsourcing. Something that I want to also raise a little bit of attention on is that big companies that are in the business of data management, they have literally data farms out there. So it's not only on mechanical to deal with these issues. You have companies whose business is labeling data everywhere. It's not only China and India, they are everywhere. And they are feeding the data that ultimately goes in those algorithms. So it's not only a problem of scientific awareness, it's a problem also of penetration in the practitioner world, right, in the real world, with big issues of exploitation. I mention this all the time because I don't want to remember. We are basically fueling our AI economy on a new form of slave laboring, as it was, like 1,500 years ago. If you look at research from 15 years ago in this field, I think all the field was guilty of not acknowledging this problem enough. I think these days it is. If you're using crowdsourcing, please pay people well enough. And if you're using them, at least use a platform that is known to care for the workers. So just maybe avoid mechanical Turk and use something else. So the data problem alone, it's a very concrete one that really makes me question what does it mean to have meaningful human control on the AI system when much of the problems stem from the data that we collect? And the data that we collect is not really curated because most of the time we just get it out there and we just reuse it. And then we take it from there. Again, it seems to me like we're engineering something and we deal with the consequences, we're not designing for it, for what we want. It doesn't invalidate the concept of meaningful human control, but to me, requires perhaps, as I said before, a deeper understanding of who are the people and what is the context where all of this happened. 5 minutes on the clock, few reflections on the properties. First one, how do we do that, right? So how do we have AI system in AI systems where the operational design domain is explicit? And I don't know if you're familiar with this video. I don't know if the audio works, honestly, here. Have you seen this video?
Step 1, get 2 pieces of bread out. Get a butter knife and get some peanut. Take 1 piece of bread, spread it around with the butter knife.
No, Dad, with the peanut butter.
I'm just doing what it says. It says take 1 piece of bread, spread it around with the butter knife.
Yeah.
Hold on.
Get some jelly, rub it on.
So you get the point, right? So if you're teaching an algorithm, your knowledge should be this that. If you do it well, the algorithm does not make any difference, right? So the problem is a problem of knowledge engineering, knowledge elicitation, which is actually a very old problem in computer science. Let alone the question of who gets to decide, the domain, the moral domain, right? How do you tease out all of that? Knowledge engineering has been, as a field of research and practice, has been out there for a long time. There's a long tradition. It is possible, but it is very difficult. We don't know how to elicit all this knowledge about the people, the environment, the condition, the morals. That's probably going to be incomplete. Second of all, even more complicated is the type of knowledge, right? We have many different types: explicit, tacit, general, specific, situational. And to conclude, when we take it out, from whom do we? How participative is the process? Do we ask 15 people? Do we ask 1,000 people? Who are they? Nothing new, very classical, but it's an issue. So something that we need to contend with to bring this vision of meaningful human control in practice. And there is some nice work out there. I mean, actually, the group J and the group is actually working on this. This is a very nice paper that they published this year, about actually eliciting this type of knowledge. So this is a work that somehow intersects knowledge engineering and crowdsourcing. This is a game with a purpose. It's actually out there. You can play with it. You can try. Designed for the purpose of getting this knowledge out, very different type of knowledge at scale. It's a nice paper. I don't have time to. If you want to know more, just ask Jay. Jay is here, or Ujuar is also online. It's actually a very, very nice work. So how do we get it out? I don't know, but work is needed, quite a lot of work. Then I just gather these 3 properties together because I think we have an issue here that is an issue of semantic gap. When we're talking about shared representation between the human and the AI, we are talking about, how do we specify how things are and what we want? If we would be able to specify precisely constraints, and if we have this mental model, then we could even enforce those constraints somehow. But the issue is a very old issue again in computer science, which is the problem of semantic gap. How do we imagine problems and how a machine actually gets it? So there is also something to be done there, and we've been working on that also too. So so last year, this is a paper first authored by Agora, a PhD student of ours. We've been actually trying to look at that from the perspective of computer vision models. Computer vision used everywhere. It's a problem of interpretability, if you want, and explainability. It's the idea that you want to understand how a particular machine learning system works and what does it catch up. We have some tools that sort of work, like Senia Synapse, that give us a sort of item-based understanding of what works, what doesn't. By the way, we have a lot of tools also for structured data. I'll get back to that in a second. But these visual systems are the one that we spend a lot of time on. And so what we did there was to design and engineer a system to actually collect a semantically rich description of what the concepts that actually seems to play a role within a machine learning system that is trained on a particular data set. Because if you can, then you can reason about it. You can explore and you can reason, which is actually the next step. This is a paper from this year, which is really about debugging, right? Having the mechanism, the tools, the system that allow you to express constraints that you want the system to have. If you are classifying a picture of a particular scene and the picture contains this and this, but not that, that should be the class. You explain, you define beforehand what are your expectations, what you think that the model should know, and you can compare it with what the model picks up. And if you can do this systematically, then you can go back and improve it eventually. And I don't think we were the first, I don't think we were the last. Actually, this year at Kai, I don't know exactly sure where, but Microsoft
building good natural language processing
came out with something like this for NLP. It's a crowdsourced, human-in-the-loop approach to debug big language models.
Data and get great accuracy. Should the team celebrate and deploy the models?
It's okay.
No. Models that work great on standard test sets often fail in the wild. You need to test your models beyond simple train test splits. But how? There are two types of approaches. Those that help people write tests and those that automatically test the model. The good thing about people is that they know when the model is right or wrong. But writing tests is slow. In contrast, automated methods are fast, but they can only test limited aspects of model behavior. We propose a human-AI partnership called adaptive testing that combines the strengths of both humans and large-scale language models like GPT.
Reminds you something, Jim?
The AI generates lots of tests designed to highlight bugs, while the person decides if model behavior is right or wrong. Here's how it works. You start by typing in a few input examples in a topic representing an aspect of model behavior, such as to-dos that are in the past tense. If the model is good, it will probably pass all these initial examples. Then you can ask the AI to generate a large batch of similar tests in the current topic, sorted by how likely they are to reveal failures. You can then label a few of the top suggestions that are in the current topic and then repeat the process. This results in a growing set of organized tests optimized to break the model being tested. The AI can also suggest new topics.
So you get it, I think. Right?
Enabling you.
And we also require interfaces. We also require to have the right tool to give to the different people that are part, that have actually a role in this system to understand what's going on. So these are certainly one work. I don't know if the other actually ended up. But Agata again did a fantastic job in co-designing, using Richard Design as a methodology, working with also some students from industrial design to design, evaluate, prototype, and then implement, although it's a low-fidelity prototype, a system for explainability, right? That actually capitalize on these higher level, semantically rich labels to explore the model behavior, to understand how the model works. Something accessible, something that doesn't require expertise, and it is, from a mental model perspective, more aligned with how people think, not how the machine thinks. Ultimately, we have designing for and with human, right? So there should be, I think, the focus more. To conclude, this is something that was mentioned in the paper. Designing for meaningful human control requires designing for emergence. I totally agree with that, and this is where we're going. If you look at what's out there right now, this is exactly the direction. We need new tools. So this is, again, a very recent paper from Google, from Kai, where they designed, developed, and tested a tool for quickly prototyping prompts from language models to give the instruments for the people that are in the process to understand what's going on. Right, so in this case, it's a language model, so you can easily create prompts, modify, fine-tune the language model and see what comes out. Again, to understand things like potentially harmful behavior and biases. But we need to have the same classes of tools also for the other type of AI that we want to design. If our goal is, as it should be, to design and not engineer, or at least first design and then engineer. One last thing, and then I'm really done. I don't have time to talk about it, but please look at it. This is a fantastic work that a PhD student of ours just published at FACT with Dave as a co-author. value-based assessment of AI systems is a framework. She went through an insane amount of literature effect. The paper was accepted with stellar reviews, and she put together a nice model, a nice framework to reason from let's say, from a value perspective down to the mechanism and the tools available right now in state of the art to assess and eventually later on to design AI systems. So this is just a review. What we're working on right now is actually to create those tools. That's which is going on. If you want to know more, we can talk with Dave, myself, or Mireia, who's actually the one doing most of the work. I'm just here talking about it. Thank you very much. That's it.
We don't have questions in the chat yet, but people are connected. Feel free to ask questions. I have a comment myself. I love that you unpacked our paper. It's always like a privilege for somebody who just published the paper to see the perspective of others and the appropriation. And actually,
next time I will just criticize you so easily.
No, but you know, the feeling that I got is like cool, but this opens up a lot of questions. But you know, there is a lot of work that is being done in this space to cover what you are saying should be done. And at least in my perspective or my view, is exactly what the paper was supposed to do. Like provide and handle for people who are already actively contributing in these spaces to see, okay, if I really bring this forward, it's covering this space, it's contributing in this space. So it's like a catalyst for, so in my view, these properties are a way to catalyze ongoing efforts towards a vision for meaningful human control. And in that sense, I really thought, wow, amazing. Alessandro is really filling the spaces, and that this doesn't mean that we solved something. Huh?
No, I hope I didn't give the impression that I was. I mean, what I was trying to do was mostly to discuss the paper and connect it with the work they've been doing. So I hope that what did come out was not a criticism or something that was not complete. As an effort, as an instrument, is very good, and I really liked the way that you tackled it. So there is no bad in that respect. The only, if you want, reflection that I have, and it's not a reflection on the work, it's a reflection of the field, perhaps, or a reflection of what we are doing, is that in order to do what we should do, we still have a long walk to walk, a long road to walk. Some stuff are blue sky because we haven't been doing them yet. Others, unfortunately, are old problems. And yeah, I mean, it's not about the paper, right? It's just about the status of the field at the moment.
Yeah.
Comment, but I will leave to the others first. Questions?
Okay, then you can.
Yeah. So yeah, same as I think it was a privilege. It was really nice to see how it connects also to your work. So one thing I think is important also for everyone, I think, or vision that I saw on paper that is different between like fully, let's say, ethical AI and meaningful human control. We don't claim that they are the same, because I mean that might be my vision of morality might be something different vision from someone. What we try to do in human control is there's someone that is responsible for this. And given this, I'm just trying to.
There are also other values, right? That probably create tensions.
Values, cultural differences. Yeah. There's so many things, and we say like this problem we don't know exactly. It's a bigger issue, so we want to say okay, we want to have some attribution of responsibility. If you did this, you should be responsible for any of this outcome, this group of people, this person, thing. So I like a lot when you mentioned your work on crowdsourcing there, and especially when you mentioned like the properties, like in the property one and the shared representations there. I could see how it could work, help to bridge the semantic gap, to get a better knowledge domain, but I do feel like the question of responsibility, because then gets one step even further away. I'm thinking, okay, let's say the semantic gap, for example. I wanted to better define this, and if that's wrong, there is some impact and there's some consequences. Who should be responsible in your view? Is the crowd worker who designed the crowd working experiment? Someone else? Because that defining these creates some additional layers. So how do
It
you see
does,
this?
but I mean, responsibility and human control, I don't think they are the same thing either, right? So you can be responsible for something, right? But to be meaningfully in control of it requires many of those properties to be there. So I don't know if your assumption here is that meaningful human control and responsibility are the same thing. I don't think so, right? One probably implies the others,
Yeah.
or they are,
It's not
they are connected. So it is a very interesting question for me. Who ultimately is responsible for a system if you take the full value chain, from the data to, I mean, probably it's the company, I don't know, right? I guess this is part of the discussion, but it would be reductive to put the locus of control, of meaningful control, just there. Because the control of how the system behaves is actually all along this pipeline. And this will be, to some extent, I mean, I don't know if the analogy here holds, and I'm just making one up. But if you're buying a car that doesn't work as expected, of course you hold the manufacturer responsible for it. But if your question is the manufacturer in control of the production process, the answer to this question goes deep. Right? When they call back a car because something does not work with your ABS, right? Of course, the manufacturer is responsible, but where the problem is in the value chain is somewhere else, right? Because if you want to be in control, that's why we have auditing processes. We have somehow many different approaches to somehow align the two, the control and the responsibility.
Yeah. Okay.
I don't know if that aligns with your way of, but this was my point, by the way. Yeah, I mean, I'm not trying to say since nobody is responsible, since everybody is responsible, nobody is responsible. That's not my point.
Well, I do get it. I mean, we also said, I think it was, we don't try to say that they are exactly the same concepts, but what we try to do is like this: what is a reasonable attribution of responsibility? Take for example, automated vehicles. Okay, they're in the sense of like legal responsibility and liability. We say like, okay, someone gives you a form and say, okay, you have to supervise this. If anything happens, that's your fault. And you sign a paper and something happens. Are you really responsible? If you really, I mean, like, could you do something about it? And so that's also, I mean, you could not be, you didn't have any meaningful human control. And as we say, like, even if you have a legal paper that signed it, we say that's not a meaningful
human control because you didn't have an understanding of what you were have to be responsible for.
You couldn't see the algorithm, you couldn't understand all this data.
Yeah.
Okay, but
I agree with this.
Next.
Logically, it's my turn, right? To ask the question, but I really don't understand.
Yeah.
Very interesting. Tokens, I really like the meaningful word, like the meaningful control. And I was wondering how it is expressed or realized under the different stages of AI. For example, for AI practitioners, meaningfully control, I guess it would mean for debugging. So it would mean how human would improve the model, I guess, debug the model. But for an end user, meaningful control could be at the decision-making level, I guess. So there's meaningful control is for all of these like stages, right? Who makes the decision? Who?
No, we'll turn the question to the experts here. I think this is more of the.
Yes.
Or when the model is updated.
I would say both in the design phase and in the use phase, there might be different reasons that needs to be traced to place responsibility. So you might have in use some responsibility lies somewhere different from, so in multiple places basically.
Yeah, and it depends on the users.
Yeah, might be something. So I think the whole concept, that is central concept, is that there is one way to meaningfully connect the specific consequences action to a person or group of persons. It's not like think of the little written computer says no, and that's it. The algorithm says no to you, and that's it. That's like, we will not say was enough. There was a specific set of design decision that was made for people, there was a specific data set that was used, and that was connect somehow to people, doesn't get like lost. There's this concept with gaps. maybe to connect this whole idea discussion with human control came from the debate on autonomous background systems, and there was like, okay, if there is some causality, killing someone there, and also we say, all this kind of discussion, we want to shoot them, kill robots, and all these things. So basically, they said, okay, if you're going to have any kind of machine with some kind of autonomous automatic features, it needs to have some meaningful human control. We cannot just say the machines are just going there, targeting, shooting, and doing whatever they want for the machine.
So meaningful control could also mean that the user follows what AI says.
Yeah. So
if AI is correct and ethical, responsible.
Maybe we have to make a distinction that was troubling us for a very long time. Meaningful human control. So a system under meaningful human control doesn't mean that it's an ethical system. It's a very big distinction. It means that in any point of time, somehow you can trace back a responsibility, somebody that is responsible for an action taken, for the course of action. But that can be also that the system is acting unethical, or the system is designed to do something unethical. But you can go back and say, then you can audit that.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, it's.
There's a question from Cars. I see you always have excellent questions. So the question is, there are a lot of examples of tools like this. Is there any work out there trying to understand how these tools are actually used in practice? Is that correct, Cars? Yeah, sort of. You can also just say the question if you want, and if well, the thing is that no, we something that we did was this work of Agora on the explainability tool. There we engage as much as we could with practitioners of different type to check what they use right now and how they will use the tool that we design. There is an increasing body of work created, especially by big companies about it. So if you look at Kai this year and last year, there are several papers from Apple, from Microsoft, I think even one from Google, where they actually at least try to look internally of how these particular tools are used, especially explainability ones. I think there is also some work on model cards, which is another, but yeah. So something, I mean, right now the momentum is growing in this particular, and I think this is also where the opportunities are from a research perspective, to go really and trying to understand how all of this happens in practice.
I think he's happy.
Okay.
No,
Cars is never happy.
But he's coming up. Maybe that means something.
Which is super, because it's always an amazing conversation with him.
I also have a question about the research opportunities.
Yeah.
I'll start a little bit far. I mean, fine. So just to uncover a little bit of the process, how we came up with the 4 properties. So we talked a lot. We talked a lot, and I mean a lot. And we've gone nervous laughs. Yes, we've gone through a few case studies, many more than was included in the paper. Yeah, the thing is that, yeah, correct me if I'm wrong, but I don't think any of us had, at least the people who were doing the kind of the writing, neither of us had any, well, much experience working with large amounts of data. Right, so we were approaching it from different perspectives, multidisciplinary perspectives, different approaches to AI. But I think what many of your examples bring on top of what we've put in the paper is the data part. So I value that a lot. And that goes to the question that you phrased somewhere in the middle about, yeah, well, do we think that these properties are, well, generalizable beyond these 2 examples? How useful they are, perhaps, yeah. And this is something that I want to find out for myself as well. So I really think that there is a lot of conversations to be had within AiTech, with broader AI tech Agora circles, just on, on sanity checks, and running these 4 properties by different examples and trying to see, right, we didn't really think about this, well, data providers, right? When we were talking about people who were affected, we were thinking of people who interact with AI, people who design AI, people who govern AI.
Providers, not itself, so not that layer,
Yeah.
but the role of data in as a venue for losing control, let's say. Yes, in the hiring case especially,
Yes,
or
yes,
in
yes.
the labeling of data for autonomous vehicles, like
Yeah.
the way you might label.
Yeah, sure, but
data.
how about the people who provide this data, right? So
Yeah,
this,
yeah, yeah.
we are talking about their demographics characteristics. We are talking about how
Biases,
the system.
how
Yes,
customers
exactly.
design.
The biases, the way in which the AI affects them. So I think the checklist is super nice, super cool, very
Yeah,
good.
Yeah.
kudos to Joel and team. That's,
Yes,
that's,
yes, yes.
That's
They
very
don't
good.
see me. Yeah. So yeah, this is just to reinforce the sentiment from Luciano and Lucia. I think this is a really great perspective that I really enjoyed, and I think yeah, it's just we need more of that.
Yeah.
And look also to be so the paper is clear about the fact that those 4 properties are necessary but not sufficient. Right? Probably there are
Yeah.
more.
Yeah.
And as much as I can, let's say, I could discern from the paper, I think those 4 are spot on. I don't think there is anything fundamentally wrong about them. I wonder how much people actually think about them. So if anything, for instance, I would be very curious to understand how much of these particular angles are somehow in the mindset of practitioners and scientists this year. Because I think I still find examples, even from scientists, where this is not the case.
Yeah.
So that could be an interesting empirical exploration.
Yeah, and I don't think people have actually consciously thought much about that. It's more like we try to find different. Right? We try to find different kind of approaches on practice, and we try to map them onto these properties. And not always they map directly, but one way or another, we found ways of channeling, for instance, some approaches to 2 or 3 properties at the same time. So we do think it provides a kind of a nice meta narrative in a sense, which might not yet be there.
It does. So, as I said, I don't think there is anything fundamentally. So, the generalizability I was talking about was not necessarily in the properties. I mean, one will have to make an exhaustive explorations to see if all of them are always meaningful all the time. First analysis seems they are. I don't know asymptotically. It's mostly, to me, the generalizability was more on how to look at them from the perspective of the people you want should be in control, and to the domain when it comes to the details. Unfortunately, for these systems, the details matter. We are not yet in the situation where we can really just simulate the spillover effects or the negative effects so that we can control for them. So the details is where things become real and we realize that, for instance, the mental model is completely off.
Yeah, and as you said in the presentation, like for the model ODD, why the people that are relevant, just that. Mapping out who are is, we say, we do a stakeholder mapping, but already that is usually poorly defined.
Yeah.
So even all the components of that, so in fact, we said several times, from here, now we can start unpacking so much.
Unpacking, it's quite a lot of opportunities for very nice work here. Yes.
Okay, do we have other questions?
One more question.
Yes.
Sorry. I'm curious to know that, according to you, to what extent the notion of meaningfulness is a subjective notion?
My God. Let's say that even if it was objective, the number of dimensions through which the notion of meaningful should be analyzed is so big that it will probably be a computer. Because meaningful according to what particular perspective, right? So how confident you are about the system, how much you trust it. Trust is a very loaded word here. How much do you rely on it? How much amount of meaningful control you need to have in order to satisfy your legal or organizational requirements. So it's I don't know if it is going to be easy to box it in such a way that you can say, oh, that's it. Might vary a lot, I suspect.
Yeah, I think maybe for that the other paper from Philip is better, right?
So what is meaningful?
Yeah, within this case, like for ALS systems, meaningfulness in human control, I think that paper provides more definition.
Yeah, if we continue our philosophical discussion, I can go a long way.
We take ourselves out. But it's true that it's always a troubling term, because when you apply to meaningful work, meaningful application scenarios in general, and then how do you define meaningful? What are the criteria?
Yeah. So I'm working with also with a PhD student right now, and there is on the topic of he's working on relevance, some kind of related to this frame problem. So it's basically when you stop reasoning about something and you do something, when is enough? So that's kind of connection. When is this meaningful? So it's a very tough question. Nice, critical one.
But I'm curious, why did you ask the question?
Because not in terms of the expertise of the experts who are working on the meaningful human control or totally on the AI systems, but according to the cultural background of them or some different perspectives of the designers and developers of the AI systems, the notion of meaningful might be different or might lead to different approaches, different results.
Yeah, that is indeed true. And then, yeah, one of the practical kind of tips that we give towards the end of one for properties, essentially to know all the stakeholders in the design process early on, and not when you already have an AI system. So let's think what I don't know, disadvantaged populations think of that. No, just ask them before you design the whole thing. So that is really, really important to address this kind of notion of subjectivity.
To do it inclusively is
yeah,
it's very complicated. Ask what the citizen science initiative is.
Yeah.
To design at scale.
Yeah.
It's actually something that we don't necessarily know how to do yet. Properly.
Yes.
You showed at the very end of the paper where you talk about other tools that are used for this designing. I was wondering what are the elements of these tools? Are they metrics? Are they simulations? Or are they just GUIs for doing this?
Well, you could reduce them as to simple graphical user interface on top of. Practically, I think there is some design science to it, because you don't simply want to surface the technological handles that the technology affords, but you want to present them in a way that somebody can design with. To give you a personal example here, I mean we are recording, but it's fine. So this year I taught for the first time a course on machine learning for designers, second year. So students that have no background knowledge on algebra, we cannot teach them the math, right? But they want to use AI as a material, machine learning as a material. If you simply if you simply map one-to-one the concepts that come from the math, if you want, right, from the big technology to them, they will be lost, right? If you want someone to design, you need to give them affordances to contend, to experiment, to prototype, to play. This requires thinking about how to do that. So cannot be only a simple quote-unquote user interface on top of the hyperparameters that you might actually, or the fine-tuning parameters that you might get out of GPT-3. And then you might start from there, yes. Thanks. Better than nothing.
This might be a bit of a long one, and it's a bit badly formed, because it's something
It's okay, the presentation also was not badly formed. So.
But the word agent comes up in the paper quite a lot, and I have a bit of trauma around the word agent, because I was an agent-based modeling for a while, and as soon as you say agents, I said, yeah, but what do you mean? And it tends to come with ideas of autonomy and things like this, and then it goes back to Kant and moral agents and things like this. But it seems a lot of the systems you talked about, there's models, there's systems, there's agents, and there's a bit of a blurry line between them sometimes. And there's a bit of a process where you start some data collection, and then the data set becomes a bit agential in its own right just because it exists and comes to the world that way. And the model, like some of the models have agency because as soon as you put out a model that classifies faces into gay or straight, you're doing a thing in the world and you're saying something about it. And then some of them are really nicely wrapped up in self-driving cars, which are really clearly mobile agents in the world. And it feels like a fundamental challenge to notice these shifts and to be able to talk about these things in a coherent way.
I agree. I tend to agree. I mean, the notion of agency in these systems is very distributed, right? Which I think it was implicitly my point. Right? And so responsibility, where does it land? The agencies is everywhere. Clearly, it's not in the car itself alone, right? I mean, so I honestly, I'm not sure how to. That's my personal deficit, I guess. How to talk in a structured way about it. I think it's part of a mental model. I'm more of a grown up as I did a little bit of everything in my research career, but I'm more, let's say, data, if you want, statistical, than a knowledge representation. I'll do my fair share of fun there. So maybe that's why my conception is so data centric and less traditional agent modeling centric. So I'm not sure.
Yeah, I don't know that there are good answers here. It feels like an inherent bit of message.
Even if that's the way I see it. Even if you have an agent as an agent-based modeling, right? You have at some point in time to define the properties and how those properties vary for the agent, which ultimately is a design and a data problem. Because you needed to somehow make assumptions about what are the properties that matter and how they distribute in their particular property space. If you want this to somehow be reflected by an understanding of the world which is empirical, you have to use data. You fall back on, okay, who collected the data, how does it collect me? So you somehow get back into that. So to me, that is almost essential and necessary but not sufficient condition. The data part.
Yeah, and so I think there's a challenge to hold on to that while also seeing things as somewhat contained agents in the world.
It was more of a reflection, I guess. Yes, I don't know. I think we can spend some good time in front of you on that, or two.
I think we're done. Thank you very much.
Thank you for inviting me.
It was great.
It's so nice.
Thank you very much, everybody who attended also online. And we will publish the
Okay, I guess we're done. Thank you for everyone remotely. Bye.